There has been an unprecedented number of election lawsuits filed this year. 2024 is already the most litigious presidential election, and it's still a week out from Election Day. I'm Sophie from Docket. Let's go through the highly consequential lawsuits that are likely to be decided in this final week before the election and how they will impact voters. With Pennsylvania having the most electoral votes of all the battleground states and a crucial Senate race on the ballot, it's not surprising that many of these election lawsuits have been filed in the Keystone State. Republicans are seeking to prohibit voters whose mail in ballots were rejected for a trivial envelope error from being able to cast a provisional ballot, completely disenfranchising them. All three court levels in Pennsylvania rejected this lawsuit. The RNC even asked the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to pause its own decision, which it declined to do as expected. The GOP has also asked the U.S. Supreme Court to block the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision for this election. If SCOTUS grants the RNC's request to pause or stay that ruling, any voter in Pennsylvania whose mail-in ballot is rejected for missing an inner secrecy envelope will not have their vote counted, won't have the chance to fix that mistake, and won't have the opportunity to cast a provisional ballot. With both the race for president and Senate at a near tie, this decision could be outcome determinative. Pennsylvania voters, if you are voting by mail, please make sure to place your ballot in the inner secrecy envelope first and then the outer return envelope to ensure your ballot is counted. A separate lawsuit is trying to ensure that counties are required to notify voters if their mail-in ballot is rejected for a trivial error, such as a missing signature or an incorrect date. This lawsuit was filed by pro-voting groups in Washington County, which is right outside of Pittsburgh. Pennsylvania trial and appeals court judges both ruled that counties are required to notify voters if their ballots were rejected and offer them the opportunity to cast a provisional ballot. The RNC appealed the decision to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, where a decision remains pending. If Republicans get their way here, that means counties across the Commonwealth will not be required to notify voters of errors on their ballots, meaning thousands of voters could have their ballots rejected without them even knowing. One of the biggest lies that Republicans are pushing ahead of this election is the myth that non-citizens are voting in our federal elections in large numbers. We know this isn't true. Non-citizen voting for federal elections is already a federal crime and is incredibly rare. That hasn't stopped Trump and his allies from peddling this conspiracy theory. One case in particular has made national headlines and has now made its way up all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Virginia's Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin launched a voter purge program purported to remove alleged non-citizens from the rolls. In reality, it removed numerous naturalized citizens and other eligible voters because it relied on inaccurate and outdated data from the Department of Motor Vehicles. Federal District Court and the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals blocked the program, saying that it violates the National Voter Registration Act's 90-day quiet period, which prevents the systematic removal of voters from the rolls within 90 days of an election. Virginia officials have now filed an emergency petition in the U.S. Supreme Court to revive this purge program by tomorrow, October 30th, just 6 days before the election. Most of these lawsuits are unsurprisingly filed in swing states, but one of the biggest election lawsuits of the year is out of Mississippi. The RNC filed a lawsuit in January challenging Mississippi's law that allows mail-in ballots to be counted if they are postmarked by Election Day, but received by officials within 5 business days after. You may be wondering why the Republican National Committee would spend its resources challenging a law in Mississippi, which is a solidly red state. Election law experts have said that it is clear that the GOP is using this case to try and strike down laws in the approximately 20 other states that have these post-election day ballot receipt deadlines and toss mail-in ballots from thousands of voters who are disproportionately Democrats. A George W. Bush-appointed federal judge rejected the case in July, ruling that Mississippi's law is constitutional and compliant with federal law. Republicans appealed to the ultra-conservative Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, and then a panel of 3 Trump-appointed judges on the Fifth Circuit reversed that decision, saying that the mail-in ballot receipt deadline runs afoul to federal law. However, the Fifth Circuit left it up to the lower court to determine what the ballot deadline will be for this year, given how close it already is to the election. That ruling remains pending. The case could potentially make its way up all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where a ruling would impact voters across the entire country, but it's unlikely to make its way all the way up to SCOTUS before before the election this year. If the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court rules in favor of Republicans, thousands of voters across the country could have their ballots rejected due to postal delays, something that they have no control over. As of now, the Fifth Circuit's ruling does not change any ballot receipt deadlines, and if it does, it would apply to states in the Fifth Circuit's jurisdiction, which is Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana. Louisiana requires mail-in ballots to be received before Election Day, but Texas has a post-Election Day mail ballot receipt deadline. We'll be watching to see what the Lone Star State does about this ruling. So the impact of the Fifth Circuit's ruling will be important to watch in the post-election period to see if these other states will use it to justify rejecting late-arriving ballots. A lawsuit from the Trump campaign and RNC out of Nevada could impact thousands of ballots in that battleground state. Trump and the RNC filed a lawsuit to toss out mail-in ballots missing a legible postmark that are received up to 3 days after Election Day. All 3 court levels in Nevada rejected this case, but if Republicans appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, that ruling could potentially impact voters across the country.
There's no basis for an appeal here, right? This is the Nevada Supreme Court interpreting Nevada state law. Now, can the Republicans always make their frivolous arguments about, independent state legislature theory? Maybe. But I think it's a real long shot here. I mean, this is a very, very straightforward application of state law. It is also, I might add, a consistent interpretation of state law that the federal court had. So for them to argue that somehow this is totally an outrageous and novel interpretation of state law, I think won't get them any far. I'd really be surprised actually if they even took this one to the U.S. Supreme Court.
This lawsuit specifically argues that counting these ballots would harm Republicans since they vote by mail at a lower rate than Democrats. We'll be keeping an eye out to see whether Trump or the RNC appeals this case to SCOTUS. To stay up to date on the latest developments in all of these highly consequential cases and hundreds more, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter so you can click the link right here on the screen or in the description of this video to get all of that news delivered straight to your inbox. Another batch of consequential election lawsuits from Republicans this year challenges the votes of certain military and overseas voters in key swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and North Carolina. In Michigan and North Carolina, the RNC is trying to disenfranchise certain U.S. citizens who have never lived in that respective state, but whose parent or legal guardian is registered there. For example, children of military personnel who are U.S. citizens but were born and live abroad. Trial court judges rejected Republicans' request to toss these votes in both of those states, but the RNC promptly appealed. The state appeals court judges in Michigan and North Carolina side with the RNC. Thousands of these voters living abroad, which are increasingly presumed to be majority Democratic voters, will be disenfranchised. A lawsuit from civil rights advocates out of South Carolina will impact 11,000 young voters in that state. The ACLU filed a lawsuit against the state's DMV over an error that prevented over 17,000 17-year-olds who will be 18 by Election Day from registering to vote, which state law allows. A judge declined to fix this error, leaving 11,000 eligible young voters unable to cast a ballot this November in the state. The judge said the requested relief was too drastic and said it would create disorder in the voting system. Around 6,000 of the original 17,000 impacted voters were able to register through other means outside of the DMV, but South Carolina's voter registration deadline has now ended. The ACLU has yet to file an appeal. In addition to the cases where we're expecting rulings in the final week before the election, there's been a host of crucial lawsuits that have already been decided that will directly impact how you vote, how elections are run, and how ballots are counted. 7 rules passed by Trump allies on the Georgia State Election Board were recently struck down. The rules would have required poll workers to hand count ballots on election night, likely delayed election certification, and more. The RNC asked the Georgia Supreme Court to restore those rules for this election, but the state Supreme Court declined that request. The rules remain blocked. And another crucial ruling for democracy, a Georgia judge ruled that local election officials must certify election results. They cannot refuse or abstain from certifying because state law requires them to certify. This comes amid growing concerns that MAGA county officials would simply refuse to certify their jurisdiction's election results if Trump loses this November. In Pennsylvania, the long-standing battle over whether to count timely received mail-in ballots that are simply missing a handwritten correct date on the outer return envelope is over for this election cycle. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, because of a technical issue with the lawsuit, vacated a lower court's ruling that required these ballots to be counted. Pro-voting groups filed a petition with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court asking them to reconsider the case after they fixed the technical issue with the lawsuit, but the state Supreme Court declined. Voters casting ballots by mail in Pennsylvania must handwrite the date they fill out the ballot on the outer return envelope in order for their ballot to be counted. These are just some of the cases that have or will impact the 2024 election, but you can find hundreds more at democracydocket.com where you can read the actual court filings for yourself. With Election Day just 1 week away, it is more critical than ever to stay up to date on all of these lawsuits. So sign up for our newsletters to stay informed. You can click the link right here. And if you want to support our work and get even more exclusive insights and news, you can become a premium member today. For this week only, we are offering a $20 discount on our membership. You can click right here to sign up. Thanks for watching Democracy Docket. I'm Sophie, and I'll see you next time.